Hey, Dr. Cunningham, thanks for being here today. And I wanted to, now is June, it's Pride Month, and we have this moniker, it's in all over popular media now, LGBTQ+. It's a lot of letters. I don't think a lot of people exactly know what all that means. And I know as psychologists, we're trained to look at the nuances. We want to make sure that we're understanding communities and their needs really specifically. Could you help the general public out there understanding that these terms, LGBTQ+, and what role maybe psychology has for the LGBTQ plus communities?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. I think a lot of times people get lost in the letters, and they don't know what letters to say and what order and what they mean. And I think the fact that the letters are expanding really demonstrates that society is giving space for people to explore and express themselves in different ways, and then identify different ways within how they feel in terms of their sexual orientation and gender identity. Going back to the letters, so their sexual orientation is gender identity. So gender identity is how you identify as a gender, which may not be part of binary. You may not identify as a male or female. We look at things as a spectrum. So one thing that psychologists and the field of psychology is trying to do is promote the idea of a spectrum thinking. So, giving people the freedom to say, you don't have to be this or that. You can be however you want to choose to identify. Same thing goes with sexual orientation. A lot of times people think you're either straight or you're gay, or lesbian, but understanding that there can be fluidity within that. And I think the field of psychology, our responsibility to the community is allow people to not only give space to explore who they are, but also to come up with identity models that we can actually teach people and say, this is how people develop. A lot of times we have development for morality and development towards a child growing up, but also to understand that identity is also something that can be modeled. You can have a model around that. And I think that's been really helpful for a lot of psychologists to show people in different fields to say, this is normal, and this is the steps of how people can identify and develop.
Yeah, and you brought up, we were kind of chatting here about psychology's role. I know our role has changed and evolved. There's this, for a period of time, this thing called conversion therapy. I was curious if you could maybe share a little bit. Conversion therapy, as I understand, applying psychological techniques that try to reorient someone's sexuality. Is that something that's still practiced? Is that ethical? Is that something that we see as being effective, I guess, in terms of helping changing people's orientation? Or in general, how does psychology as a field look at that now?
Well, interesting. Historically, if we're thinking back in the early 1900s, conversion therapy, it wasn't probably called that, but that was a practice that was common. People would take their children to a psychologist or a psychiatrist or a doctor and say, can you fix them? Something is wrong. And thankfully, since then, we've come to know better, right? So now, I would think it's safe to say every professional, whether it be medical or mental health related, professional organization has come out against conversion therapy. I'm talking about the American Psychological Association, the American Psychological Association, Psychiatric Association, all social workers,
counseling association,
all of them. And what we know through research is that these efforts that people engage in, because of this. Well, let me say this for the point of conversation. A lot of times people think, conversion therapy, but there are other names for it as well. There's reparative therapy, there's a new term out, I can't remember off the top of my head right now. It's constantly changing terms, so I want to make that should be important.
There's other terms out there.
To describe it. We know that cause more harm than good. We know that it affects people's self-esteem, it affects people's how they view themselves. It also impacts hope, and we know hope is a big part of when people get hopeless, they kind of slip into depression,
right?
And it also kind of hurt themselves and things like that.
So it actually makes people sicker.
Yeah, yes. And the thing that what does that, you're muting a natural part of yourself, and you're muting it, and you're putting on pause. And a lot of times these processes they use aversion techniques. So what they'll do is people may think this is silly, but people used to use electroshock therapy. So they'll put a vision of the same sex in front of you, and they would shock you, to make you have an aversion to that image. And what we're learning is that, people would go through these practices and for years and still say, I still have attraction to the same sex. And when you think about how that impacts how people, you spend all this time, and your family spend all this time into it. And it really is involved. And then also there's a big intersection that a lot of people don't talk about. Is the intersection of sexual orientation and religion. So a lot of since now that conversion therapy is something that a lot of people have condoned and they don't agree with. It's still practiced in various different ways. So there are still religious groups that still partake, still do this and send their kids to this. And what it happens is that we know that religion is something that's really a big part of people's identity.
Right.
And a lot of times that intersection is like, okay, well, how can I reconcile my faith along with my sexual identity?
Sure.
And when people go through these programs that don't work, people come out of it and they're kind of lost in that way. They lose their faith. They lose their faith. And like what that is, this type of purpose.
Right.
And things like that. So we know that it's harmful. Unfortunately, there isn't a federal law. There are many states. I believe there's probably like almost 20 states that have banned it. However, another interesting fact is that those bans are only for the practice on children. Adults can still engage in conversion therapy, and it's not illegal. It's frowned upon.
Right.
And people have found different ways of getting around it. So some providers may say, like, I won't get licensed.
Right.
And so my license won't be on the line, and some people may just code it differently. They may say, I'm not doing conversion work, I'm doing work with someone who has adjustment disorder, or I'm doing someone who's working with anxiety. So we're learning that it's hard to police, and that's why I think it's important to talk about, because a lot of people think it's gone, it doesn't exist anymore, but it still exists, and it's still harming people.
It sounds like the professions have maybe come around and have made some progress, but in terms of civic rights and liberties and law, maybe we still got a little ways to go.
Very much so.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Cunningham. You're a wealth of information, and I so appreciated being able to learn a little bit more about this today.